Archaeology of Sacrifice. My name is Ina Neddermeyer and I'm head of the art department here at the Zeppelin Museum. I'm very happy to welcome Ignacio Acosta, Lionel Pernet and Anna Staab tonight. A very warm welcome to you. Also hello to my dear colleague, Dominic Busch, who hopefully will bring in many questions from the online community. So please do not hesitate to leave your questions and or comments on Facebook or YouTube. As our museum is closed since November 2nd, we are unfortunately not able to show Ignacio's video installation to the public. In order for you all to be able to see it, we've decided to start the video screening tonight, and we will afterwards have the panel discussion. The video is about 16 minutes long, and then of course we start the talk. But before, I would like to introduce to you Ignacio Acosta. He's a Chilean-born, London-based artist and researcher. Currently, he resides in Friedrichshafen, where he received the ZF scholarship by the Art Foundation. He works primarily with documentary photography and film, and his interconnected research projects involve extensive fieldwork, investigative analysis, visual documentation, and critical writings on sites. His recent projects in South America and also Northern Europe focus on resistance to extractivist industrial impact on valuable natural environments. These projects are realized in fragile ecological places that are exploited by colonial intervention and intensive capitalization. In the Zeppelin Museum, we've shown his video installation, Drones and Drums, in the exhibition Game of Drones of Unmanned Aerial Vehicles last year. Maybe you have seen his installation. And for the panel discussions, I would also like to welcome Dr. Lionel Pernet. He is an ecologist and a specialist of the Iron Age and the Roman period. He has a doctorate in archaeology from the universities of Lausanne and Paris. And since 2015, he is the director of the Musée cantonal d'Archaeologie et d'Histoire in Lausanne. His interests and research also include the history of museums collections and anthropological perspectives on material culture. Although he wasn't part of the excavation process at Momohill, the archaeological finds of Momohill, which are part of Ignacio's work, are now part of Lionel Pernet's museum collection. And I would also welcome Anna Staab. She studied cultural sciences and dramaturgy in Friedrichshafen, Maastricht, and Munich. She was a visiting research fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2015. And she worked as a production dramaturg at Theaterhaus Jena and Residenztheater Munich. Since 2019, she's a research assistant and PhD candidate at the Zeppelin University Friedrichshafen. Her research focuses on knowledge production in the arts and implications of the use of scientific methods, terms, and forms of presentations in the arts. But now we would like to start with the screening and see you back in 16 minutes.
En quelle langue la nature écrit-elle sa catastrophe ? Comment raconter l'histoire depuis l'autre côté du désastre ? Il convient d'imaginer. De fragiles fossiles, ils se brisent au contact des hommes. De futurs fossiles, archaïques portraits des utopies avortées. Il convient d'imaginer d'autres lieux. Il convient d'imaginer. D'autres lieux. Incision, entaille et ruine. Qui racontera ce sacrifice ? La roche parle. Elle raconte son histoire. roche parle et sa voix est dure. La pierre têtue du passé réclame justice. Il convient de déchiffrer les traits d'une violence oubliée. Les roches sont les eaux. En elles résident les traces d'un crime très moderne. Comment raconter cette histoire de la violence une fois que la langue meurt ? Comment déchiffrer l'écriture du désastre ? Il convient d'imaginer. Il convient d'imaginer d'autres lieux. Voir des couleurs là où les couleurs nous ont abandonnés. Il convient d'imaginer. On entrevoit un horizon derrière la brume. Comment construiront-ils un monde bien après sa fin ? Le bleu commence à se répandre. Le blanc des nuages, peu à peu, commence à prendre des couleurs, se change en un bleu pâle qui rappelle parfois le ciel et parfois la mer, parfois la brume et parfois le plastique. Incision, entaille et ruine, expulsion. Qui racontera ce sacrifice ?
So welcome back to the panel discussion. And I would say we dive directly into the talk. And I would like to start to ask Ignacio, can you explain a little bit the background of the video? How did the project evolve?
Thank you, Ina. Thank you, everyone who is here. For this, I think I'll prepare a little visual presentation, and I hope it's going to be short, but give some insight on the project itself. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and I hope everyone is seeing that. Yeah. So I started this project while I was doing this residency at Labec in the Lake Geneva, very close where the Momohill site is. And I started with the beginning of the lockdown with that documentation of the lake. Geneva always at the same height from the same point of view. And then in conversations with Lara Garcia Reine, which is the editor, we started to think of how can a journal of this lockdown could start begin. As soon as the restrictions were eased, Manon Briot, who is the communication manager of the residency, took me to this mining site. That it was extraordinary because it's the first mining site that I have ever, the quarry that's the first place where you could actually, without heavy military surveillance, as I was experiencing other sites in Sweden or in Chile mainly, which all of these sites are very heavily militarized and it's impossible to access. So this site was very easy to access, but it was something much more extraordinary about this site. That is something that Lionel will actually be able to explain much more in detail, but it's because this site has been the major site of archaeological discovery of the Celtic culture. And I was very interested in this idea of this concept that is something that I have never seen before. There was this kind of very interesting relationship between mining and archaeology. And I thought that relationship was something that it was very worth exploring. And from that moment, I started to visit the site kind of very regularly. From one side, the archaeology, well, this is something that Lionel, as I said, will explain us in more detail, but from one side, the archaeological objects that were uncovered in 2006 were taken to the Archaeology Museum in Lausanne, and then there are, from other side, the excavated materials, which is a limestone rock that is grinded and is used to cement production, is being used to encase, in this case, like infrastructure, like these dams that control the water. So I was interested in like how this material that is taken from there, one excavated objects ends up there in the museum, but also other excavated objects are part of our everyday lives. So and then during also this very long documentation of the site, I started to encounter these marks in the mine. So these marks that signifies the violence that is inflicted toward the earth, and then that became a sort of inspiration and then drive to continue studying the site, not just about the history of the site, but also these signifiers that signifies the kind of the violence. One of them, became very important, which is like this orange rock that you've seen there in the middle, which is the one that I'm holding on here. It's an orange rock that I took from the site, and then it was became a very important part of the narrative. This rock, it was 3D scanned, and in collaboration with Valle Medina and Benjamin Reynolds, we started to create these 3D readings of this rock as a way of deep studying, as doing a forensic study of this rock. So those are the cameras. Then this rock also became an important object, as you've seen through the film, because I placed this rock underwater, and then it became a very important sign for me. And then, so the film is populated by these signs that signify, one is the disruption to the earth, but also signify this very complex history that happens at this site. So in a way, the work was built, as your question is, like through a collection of different type of materials. Another material that became very important was the documentary The Crepuscle of the Cells of Stefan Gael, who was actually very generously given to me in order to build a more complex narrative. And then the archaeologists show how the movement has been, the objects of the movement have been uncovered by the archaeologists. Another element was very important was like the narrative, the voiceover, which created by the writer Carlos Fonseca and was translated into three different languages, like French, English, and German. So as you see, the film has the original text is in Spanish, but also the voiceovers in Swiss French, and then in one side we have English, and on the other side we have French and German translation. So these are all elements that are kind of started to weave together a fictional narrative about this site. Another element that was important is this book of minerals that I found at Labec at the artist residency, and then with those minerals I built imaginary representation of them, mixing them digitally, and then in collaboration with Valle and Ben, we also created these rocks that rotates, and then we can navigate these rocks. So these are imaginary rocks that are being built with this material. Another important element on the film is, and it comes from my previous investigation, especially from the drone on drones work, is how can we use drone technologies to map and to expose the impact of mining industries in natural environments. So I used drone technologies to map the site, and I was giving this software. It's Pix4D, which is a Swiss developed software that is used to enhance mining infrastructure. I started to play with this Alabec, and I understanding how can we use this to create this 3D model. So, for example, then I used the drone to photograph from all different angles these mining machines that were left on the site, and then from that it was possible to build this kind of with Valle and Ben we built this kind of 3D models of the mining machines that we kind of simulate to be underwater. We are currently working on the catalog, which will be produced hopefully by the end of the year or the beginning of the new year. And then I'm also interested in this idea and how can this site be also the site for a series of protests that are happening at the moment at the movement. And I think that those are the main elements I wanted to draw your attention to. It's very important to remind that the work is developed in collaboration with different people, like, as I say, like Lara Garcia, who is the film editor, who have worked with me on different projects before, Valle and Ben, Carlos Fonseca, who has written the narrative, Stefan Gael. So it's a body of collective work that has been built in order to create this kind of fictional narrative on the movement. And then, yeah, also a very important aspect is the sound, which is created to say, yeah. Yeah, and I hope that explains some of the main aspects of the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Ignacio. And as Ignacio said, Momohill is quite special. And Lionel, what would you say? Why is Momohill so special, and also compared to other archaeological sites?
Yeah, thank you, Ina, for the invite. And yes, indeed, it's a very peculiar site. not just because it's close to us and everybody wants to have the nicest archaeological site near his house or his home, but it has several features that are really uncommon. First, it's on a very specific geographical point on a small hill where all the rainwater that falls on the north side will end up in the Rhine Valley and then in the North Sea. And all the water that falls on the south side ends up in the basin of the Rhone Valley, the Lake Geneva, and then the Mediterranean Sea. And this feature was probably known by old populations already. And here we call it the center of the world to show that very specific geographical point. Then as Ignacio said, it's the discovery on the finds, the archaeological finds, are very closely linked to the exploitation of the quarry. There wouldn't have been probably archaeological excavations if there hadn't been the quarry. And this creates a very difficult but also interesting link between a destructive process that is looking for material and the discovery and the making of a new discourse about an archaeological site that doesn't fit in the boxes that we usually have for archaeological site. Usually we find remains of houses and we know that the people lived there, sometimes graves, and we know that it's a cemetery and people buried their death there. Or if the features are a bit more complicated, we kind of relate them to more ritual practices, temples, sanctuaries. In the Mormont, there are no signs of people living there on the long term. The bodies that are found in around 200 pits that were dug by the Celts around 100 BC on the top of the hill are filled with a lot of material, a lot of objects, cooking vessels, a lot of tools, animals, human remains, but it's not laid out as a normal graveyard or cemetery. So it's not a necropolis, it's not a cemetery. And it doesn't look like the traditional Celtic sanctuaries or temples that we know in the Iron Age of Northwest Europe. These pits are known on other sites, but not in that extent with this amount of material. It's hundreds of objects. Ignacio showed some pictures of people restoring objects in the museum. The excavation started in 2006 and we're still restoring some of the objects from the excavation that lasted until 2016. So it's very mysterious. And of course, when you have something that doesn't fit in the traditional interpretation patterns, you look for the explanations why. And in archaeology, why is always a complicated question. We can say when, who, how things happened. The objects were deposited in these pits. People probably ate, had banquets and used a lot of these objects. But why did they throw out and waste so much new things, objects that could still be used? And that's the very interest of this site. Why did these people do that? Probably on a very short period of time. But we'll come back on this probably during the talk.
Mm-hmm. And Ignacio, your title, or the title of the video work, is Archaeology of Sacrifice. And how would you say, like, how has the notion of sacrifice changed, like from the ancient rituals to a contemporary meaning?
Well, I was just very interested in the idea that in ancient cultures, the notion of sacrifice would mean an offering to the earth, and actually it was and doesn't necessarily entail expecting anything in return. So it's just an offering that you do to the earth in order. In the case of the Mormont, for what I understand, and I spoke to Nina, which is like it's a speculation. We don't actually sure, but we there is a belief that there was a German invasion at the time at the site. So the Celts would have offered these most precious objects, the humans and the animals, to the earth in order to guide us through this catastrophe. But I was interested in this, how this notion has shifted to the contemporary meaning in extractive capitalism, where sacrifice is much more mediated to market exchange. So now, instead of offering our best objects and actually family members to the earth, we sacrifice the earth in order to create more economic growth, or to have a financial. And so there's always this kind of financial mediation in exchange. And I am interested in how this notion has shifted, and then which is from those ancient understandings.
Mm-hmm. And Anna, we can barely see any humans in the video. What would you say is the role of human beings in the video?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me too, and thanks for the work, Ignacio. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that in some conceptions of scientific work, the absence of humans, or this idea of a neutral observer, is sort of an ideal. And the humans we see in the Archaeology of Sacrifice are only depicted in their relations to the objects they are excavating or extracting or analyzing. So we see hands, or we see eyes. Sometimes we see back of heads on desks, or upper bodies that are shoveling. So when I first saw the video, I got the impression that the landscape, the water, the building of the dam, the stones, the ancient relicts, they developed their own relations, their own forms of communications. And the humans we see, they come into that as parasites, a bit like Lionel just described it as well for the archaeologists in relation to the quarry. So these delicate archaeological processes seem to be just as intrusive in a way, and just as brutal as the mining machines, or the nowadays ascribed brutality of the rites that happened in the Celtic times. So in a way, I would say that what we see is that all of them dissect and extract objects from their surroundings, from their relationships, and they leave blank spots. And yeah, I mean, the voice speaking about the traces of a very modern crime, it could refer both to the mining and the archaeological work. So maybe it's not an absence of humans, but rather a presence of them as parasites. So like, yeah, parasites to this sociology of this network of artifacts and stones and buildings and landscapes. And I would say that through the different perspectives, and also through the different time levels that the video uses and refers to, we come to realize that there are going to be other observers, other parasites, other future scientists who will try to make sense of the empty spaces that these parasites have left, of the blank spots, rather than of what they consider as their findings. So yeah, maybe it's not an absence, maybe it's rather presence as parasites or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and there's already a question from the community, so I would hand over to Dominic.
I think this is relating to what Anna just said, and it's a question directed to Lionel. I'm reading it right now, contrasting the violent laboring of the excavator and the careful, delicate exposure of the cult site. Actions seem contrary at first, but pretty much the same in their finality of their extraction. So is archaeology a form of violence as well? What would you say, Lionel?
Yeah, definitely. The archaeological process is destructive. It destroys the site. And this is something sometimes that is difficult to explain. We call it rescue archaeology, and in this case, it's very much rescue archaeology because the site was not expected there, and the let's say the agenda of the quarry was to go quite fast, and they had to adapt to the finds of the archaeology. So the archaeologists had to excavate as fast as possible, remove these objects from where they had been led by people who didn't want these objects to go from there. But it was either the destruction with the machines, and we've seen the size and the violence of the machines that Ignacio just showed us there, or rescuing these objects, but removing them from a context and destroying the context, because to excavate those pits, you had to cut them in half and excavate them by halves, and of course also sacrifice part of the information to get another bit of the information. So definitely archaeology is destroying, but usually the excuse that we have is that we destroy to rescue from another type of destruction. But yes, it's creating knowledge through the removing of objects that sometimes have been considered sacred. So it is a moral issue, yeah.
And Anna just mentioned that female voice we can hear in the background, and talking about the narration of the story of the video. Ignacio, would you say that this female voice, this female person is narrating the story, or would you say that the history is told by the objects as the humans are not present?
Thank you. That's a really good. Yes, a really good question. I mean, we had this conversation with Lara, the editor, and then with Carlos, the writer of the text, and we always imagined that this would be actually a voice that comes from the future, because the work was done through in the middle of the pandemic, and then this voice would actually come from the future and encounter the land and ask questions about what could have happened in this space. So what did happen in this space? And so it's a voice that is a non-human voice that looks at this as a site of crime and then makes questions and then asks the viewer what is happening. So it's definitely a non-human voice, a neutral voice, and always we wanted to have a kind of a female voice, because also you could say that it could be the Mother Earth asking for this for what to the land, but also make a series of questions and open this dialogue without actually telling you what's happening in the land, especially at this present moment, and when we are living such an uncertain future. And then it's opening this imagination about a land that is unpopulated, and then how do we read these signs? How do we read the mark, the yellow stone mark, the stone mark with orange? How do we read this mining machine that has been left over and now is floated underwater, but it's been captured by 3D model technology? So it's definitely a voice that comes from the future, and then also speaks from the objects themselves, as you say. Yeah.
And Anna, your research focuses on knowledge production in the arts. And what would you say, how is knowledge or the process of producing knowledge shown in Ignacio's videos?
I would probably say that this is very much related to what I said earlier on about the specific way of portraying the archaeologists or the humans in this video in general. Probably also related to what Lionel described, or how Lionel described those processes that are happening there. I mean, I would say in a way, this video allows us to observe what we call knowledge, what we consider as knowledge, what we perceive as knowledge, and how what we perceive as knowledge is produced, what we accept as a way of producing knowledge and not something else, not something fictional or not something imaginary. So I would say it makes knowledge observable as a specific kind of translation itself, like as a narration of what we perceive and how we make it accessible to others, how we make sense of it for ourselves. So yeah, I would probably say one could say that it allows us to observe our orders of distinctions, how these distinctions precede our decisions upon what is to be digged out, what is to be extracted, what is to be preserved, what is object of research, of knowledge production, and what is part of its surrounding, what is considered as hindering and then destroyed, what is hindering this research. And I would, I mean, by doing so, this research, I would say, somehow becomes part of an imaginary process, as the video says. So it also allows us to observe the distinction between what we call knowledge and what we call fiction. And the artist, in a way, I would say Ignacio becomes a parasite himself. He becomes a parasite to the mining and the research processes that are happening there. And this is a form of knowledge production too. So he's producing himself, or the installation, I would say, is producing a kind of knowledge itself, not one that I could put in words here and then write it down, because that again would be a translation, also knowledge, but another knowledge. But maybe knowledge is indeed this parasitic process, or at least always a process that depends on parasites and certain perspective, certain approach to something.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's also one question for Anna from the community.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say it's a question that is directed towards the sociologists under us, but also it's maybe a question that the artist himself can answer. Is Archaeology of Sacrifice utopian, science fiction, or dystopian? So you guys decide who's going to answer that question.
You want to start, Ignacio?
I think it's difficult to say. I think in a way, I always thought it would be kind of science fiction, because it's kind of imagining a future, but it's also very dystopian, and I think could be actually a little bit of the three of them. I don't know. I think I always started with the science fiction, because it's like imagine, but it's also dystopian in the way that disrupts, isn't it? I don't know. Anna, what would you say?
Well, I don't think I saw it as a judgment or something like that. So I'm not sure if I saw, well, I mean, there is this sound in the background which stays very threatening all the time, I would say. So there are certain, I would say, aspects of a dystopian conception. But then again, I would also say it's not saying look at how brutal all these processes are, or look at how cruel this world is. So it's rather, I would say it's rather doing the opposite. It's rather observing orders of distinctions, observing also how these kinds of distinction orders can be characterized as knowledge production or sacrifice, and how these different ways of ascribing brutality or something else, how they can change. So I would say I also saw some utopian ideas in it, because it keeps referring to a future or to different observers who might describe something completely different, who might see something completely different. So it probably has parts of all of it, but it allows us to observe how these perspectives depend upon our ways of framing something, or narrating something, or imagining something, or something like that.
Okay, and Anna, you talked a lot about the process of producing knowledge and this combination of science and art. And Lionel, what would you say, how artistic is archaeology? Because we've heard that the role of imagination is quite important. It's also the process of restaging, of filling a gap we don't know. We have to create meaning where we don't find meaning. So what would you say? Isn't it a delicate navigation between fiction and reality?
Yeah, it is definitely. And archaeology wants to be a science, wants to be a precise science, but is not really, because you can't experiment the excavation twice. So you can't reproduce an experiment in the sense of natural science, where you can find the same context and redo the exact same experiment. So it's a mix of technical aspects that borrow a lot to natural sciences, but also a lot of intuition and also imagination, and there you have several schools, you have different schools. Some archaeologists just want to describe what they see and the facts, and say we can't go further. This is what we have in the earth, and the interpretation is going to be wrong anyway, because we don't know what these people thought, what went through their heads. We don't know where they were living. In the case of the Mormons, why they came up on this mountain, and what was happening really around them. Was there a Germanic invasion? Was there a climatic problem at that moment? Was there an epidemic? Now we think about other things that we didn't think about before. Were these people maybe badly hit by a plague and they thought this was their last hours of life, and that they had to really do something against that and find help with the gods, or find help with supreme powers? So this is all imagining, and I think it's very interesting to go from the facts to a more narrative and describing what could have gone through the heads of these people. So to me, yeah, this part of creation. I don't know if it's art. I wouldn't call it art, but it is certainly a process of creating something and creating a story or a history. But I think it's very interesting to give artists as well this material and have this point of view that is completely different, that doesn't come from the usual way we interpret things in archaeology, and let ourselves also just be taken by this more oniric and other vision on the same find. So yeah, there is a strong link between archaeology and contemporary art. The material of archaeology really, I think, is very interesting for contemporary artists, and we have a lot of people coming to the museum looking at what we do and using it as a material for their work as well. So I think the two really mix at some point and find are good matching disciplines.
And Anna, from your point of view, what do you think are the benefits or challenges of this mutual exchange of art and archaeology or science?
Well, listening to Lionel and just having seen this video, maybe one could describe science as a process of making sense of blind spots, or introducing, or imagining sense by creating specific distinctions. And when I look at the video installation, I would say art, or part of art, is then maybe staying in the imagery of the video, observing these blind spots and observing the blanks and empty spaces that are left by the research processes. So yeah, looking at what they are depicting from another perspective, from another angle, and observing what precedes them. So yeah, when in the video installation, there's this question about how to recount this history of violence once a language dies. Who will narrate the sacrifice? So in a way, I would say this opens up the possibility of speaking about the mining as well as the scientific processes violence, as I already said. But it also allows to speak about them as processes that are dependent on their own belief systems, on belief systems in which decisions about sacrifices are made as well. And through the artwork, in a way, I would say we can observe, how these are formed, or how these precede our distinction of scientific or imaginary work or something like that. I mean, right now you can also observe me or us or yourself becoming the next parasite in this chain, I would say. So we're becoming the next ones to make sense of it, to imagine in a way that there has to be a sense in it. So yeah, this process continues, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And we have seen in Ignacio's presentation that there are a lot of protests now happening at Momohill. And Lionel, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the recent developments at Momohill and how the whole public debate is developing.
Yes, the current situation is that the quarry wants to extend, and there's been several cases in the tribunal, and now we're waiting for a final decision. But in the meantime, a couple of weeks ago, as Ignacio has shown, a couple of young people have moved onto the site, are living in an old house very close to the edge of the quarry, and are trying to gather how do you say interest in the case of the Mormont, and saying now we should really stop digging and excavating the limestone there, because it's creating a huge hole and we're destroying this landscape and the nature. And this is something that's been going on for years, but now it's taking a new step. And I think it's very interesting because we are going through a form of crisis at the moment, climate crisis, now this pandemic coming, and maybe 2,000 years after the Celts, we're going back on the Mormont to call for a different way of interacting with nature and the world, maybe call to form of gods and calling for help and being recognized for what we are and what we fight for. So it's very interesting to see, and we'll see how long they stay and how the public debate will evolve. At the moment, the police hasn't come and hasn't moved them out, so this is very interesting. They haven't been moved away, and but we'll see when the final decision of the tribunal comes out what people will do, if it'll bring more people maybe to defend that natural area, because it's classified area. It's full of very special also animals and plants on the top of that hill. And in the end, if the quarry goes on, the archaeology will go on. But I don't think at the moment, the archaeology is very much the center of attention. It's very much whether the quarry will continue or not, and the drilling will continue or not.
Okay, I think there is a question also from the community, so I hand over to Dominic.
Thank you again. There's several comments, mostly compliments on the work, Ignacio, and I'm not going to cite these, but the Drawing Shed posted a question combined with a statement. He sees the objects that Ignacio has made as a part of the making of radical objects, part of a radical imaginaria that are a part of moving towards accountability. And they are rethinking of our responsibilities to the earth. Can Ignacio say something more about this resistance that artists offer up?
Well, I mean, we also have, thank you for, it's a really great, interesting comment, because also talks about this notion of radical imagination that is why we're kind of trying to offer, isn't it? Like as the work is trying to offer this space as an alternative space to advanced capitalism, in which actually we are offering these objects as sacrifice, and then we are actually offering these objects to create what Anna suggests is like this, this kind of relationship, new forms of knowledge and relationship that they weren't there before. So I think it's really important that I am really thankful for the comment, because it positions the work in this kind of, within this radical imagination. And yes, also signifies this kind of resistance, this collective resistance, because it's also a work that has been created as collectively, with not just, let's say I could be called a director of this film, but it's a work that has been created collectively as in response to a global, a collectively struggle. We are having, as Lionel said, a huge struggle with the pandemic, with the climate crisis, and the work that I create sits in this space where we collectively try to respond to these questions and trying to bring to the fore these forms of the resistance, and how can we use the work for those aims is very is the way it should be positioned. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll guess he is he's quite fine with that answer. And since we have not yet spoken about the aesthetics of the video, the work, the installation of the video, I would like to add a last question from the community. There is someone who wants to ask about the use of sound within the work, which kind of feels, in quotation marks, as if they are moving, as if we are moving backwards and forwards in time. The sound moves us in a way that brings us to the sense of an anguish. Maybe that is a comment, but let me combine that with a previous question. Why are you showing the installation as a 2-channel installation?
Right. Oh, thank you for the questions again. The sound also is a part of our collective collaboration, which is with Udit Duseya, which is a wonderful sound designer who created the sound with us, with Lara. The three of us thought about the sound, and it's very important that creates an immersive. It intends to create an immersive experience that disrupts some of the pleasant view. So if you have a pleasant view of the lake, maybe, or some views, the sound is there to kind of disrupt this experience, and also to contrast and juxtapose different types of sound. And it's actually in relation to the question about the 2-channel video installation, is because the 2-channel video installation actually allow us to juxtapose ideas and notions that wouldn't be possible with that juxtaposition. So very clearly, as we've had spoken before, archaeology and mining, excavation of machines and hand excavation, like that delicacy of the hand excavating a skull, which is taking so much care to the brutality of the machine that is like banging on the earth. So that is both an aesthetic decision, because it creates an immersive experience, but also it's a conceptual decision of juxtaposing these ideas.
Yeah, and coming back to this question of activism, I think it's quite interesting to see that there are happening so many demonstrations at the moment, and I have the impression that it comes to full circle because you're focusing so much on activism on your work. And after you finished Ecology of Sacrifice, now the protests are starting. And so I'm interested in if you would like to take up these recent developments, or are you moving on to new projects? What would you say?
Well, I think it's really, I mean, this is really fascinating. I mean, because as you said, my previous project started with activism in northern Sweden, those activists protesting for against this mine in the Jokkmokk area, in the Sami areas. And this project, the Archaeological Sacrifice, would have not been possible if the protest would have happened at the time, because there's probably quite a big police surveillance at the moment, and then that would have not been possible for me to fly the drone, for example. I think I want to talk to Lena. We'll have a conversation. I want to go there. I think it would be good to finish the project with a small photographic series or interviews to these activists. So I think probably I'll make my way very soon, hopefully. And then, yes, I am moving to other projects. One of the projects that is kind of related to this, I have a commission for a collector to do these minerals as a glass installation. So I'm working with a glass company in Munich. It's called Mayer Munich, and then I'm creating like an imaginary archive of minerals that is being produced as a glass installation. And then I am working on a few other projects. One of them, importantly, the catalog of this exhibition, which Ina, you have written a really wonderful essay, The Beauty of Forensics, that I hope everyone has the chance to read at some point, and because it's a great, it's a really amazing contribution. And then we're working with these designers, Huber and Fischer, they're from Berlin, who have created this very important concept. We might have ideas to take the video as well to other parts, maybe even to the museum in Lausanne, at some point in the future. And then there's plenty of things. But the point of the activist is, yes, it's definitely something that I would like to take on. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Anna, for this amazing discussion. And yeah, hopefully we will see your work in the Lausanne Museum. And yes, I would also like to thank you, the community, for all these questions. And yeah, have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Okay. Goodbye, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.